I will tell you how I came to revise the file, not add to it, revise it. Strike whole paragraphs I was certain of, rewrite sections I had considered settled, and append a notation at the end that I still do not have language for. Not in Veth's script, not in the 3 colonial dialects I speak, and not, as it happens, in the flat declarative notation that the Conclave's treaty office uses when it wants to say something without admitting it. I have tried 4 times. The notation remains a blank line with a date beside it, is how treaty scribes mark the things that happened that the forms were not built to receive. The file is for Daniel Voss, my husband. I wrote the original version myself. That, too, requires explanation. I was a diplomatic aide in the 7th Governorate's Administrative Bureau before I was a wife, and I was a wife for approximately 14 minutes before I was a diplomatic aide again, so the sequencing matters less than it might appear. The marriage was a procedural instrument. This is not, as my colleague Prath Anil once suggested to me over station rations, a cold way to describe a union. It is an accurate one. The Verith Station Accords required a human presence in each signatory household above the 3rd tier. The 7th Governorate was Tier 2. Requirement was not optional. The treaty registry listed 11 eligible human nationals who held appropriate diplomatic classification and had consented to household liaison arrangements under the Compact's cultural integration mandate, and after reviewing their files, I selected Daniel Voss on the following grounds. He was quiet. He was tidy in his communication. He had no recorded conflicts with Veth social customs, and his professional history as a trade attaché in 3 prior postings showed no incidents of disruption. That was the word I used, disruption. I thought it was the relevant variable. I have since revised my assessment of which variables are relevant. We were married at the 3rd tier administrative office on level 9 in a ceremony that required 11 minutes, including the document transfer and the exchange of the Compact's ceremonial markers. 2 small discs, pressed alloy, 1 Vethcast, 1 human-made, which we each held for the duration of the signing, and then wore on a cord at the collar, as the Compact specified. His disc was slightly warm. I recorded this because I record everything, and I was not yet sure which details would matter. He said nothing during the ceremony, except the required acknowledgement phrases. And, when the registrar confirmed the filing, a single sentence. Thank you for the efficiency. I said naturally, and we returned to our respective departments. We ate in the same commissary. We passed in the same corridors. I learned that he took his meal at the same hour each morning, and that he drank a pressed leaf infusion the station's human supplies manifest listed as a variety of tea, and that he did so while reading whatever data packet had come in overnight, and that he never read it with any visible expression at all. I learned that he was, apparently, exactly what his file said he was, a trade attaché of mid-career standing, unremarkable, competent within his scope, unlikely to generate incidents. This was a reasonable conclusion to draw from available evidence. I want to be clear about that. I was not naive. I was working from a file that said what it said and showed what it showed, and everything he did in the first 8 months confirmed it. The attack on Verith Station began on the 43rd day of the winter cycle rotation, at roughly the 7th hour of the administrative morning, when the outer docking ring took 3 simultaneous impact strikes from a raider element the station's early warning system had logged as a Class 4 threat, a designation our protocol had assigned to them based on their fleet composition, their known operational history, and the assumption that they were operating at their established ceiling. They were not operating at their established ceiling. Either their ceiling had been revised upward sometime in the preceding season, or the element we were seeing was not the element the file described. Either way, by the time the emergency notification reached my desk, the outer ring was breached at 2 points, and the station's primary defensive battery had taken a hit that reduced it from a fully operational Soprenin platform to a device that would, as Chief Engineer Von Itzol told me over the comm, with the particular calm of someone delivering a sentence she would prefer not to say, express very strongly held opinions at short range but not much else. I began the rescue protocol. This is the part I want to be precise about, because it matters for what comes after. Verith Station's emergency rescue protocol was a layered procedure, and the 7th Governorate maintained its own version. Somewhat extended, somewhat customized for our particular position in the Conclave's mutual assistance framework. The first layer was internal: station defense protocols, shelter directives, resource isolation. The second layer was regional: a coded hail to the nearest Conclave rescue relay, which, in our case, was the Austrian-class platform in the Vaith corridor. Approximately 4 hours transit from our position at standard response speed. The third layer was the full mutual assistance activation, which required a secondary confirmation from the Governorate's senior leadership, and which I had already begun preparing because Senior Governor Tamith Oriel was, as of the second alert, sealed in the executive wing with 3 of her staff and a comm system that had gone to reduced function after the second strike took out the relay junction on level 17. The first thing I did when the alert reached my desk was close the document I had been reviewing. A budget allocation, quest for the agricultural cooperative on level 7, which I remember thinking, in the particular way your mind preserves irrelevant details during emergencies, was a reasonable request that I had been about to approve. I set it aside. I would not return to it for 11 days. The second thing I did was open the station's emergency protocol index and begin from the top. This is not a heroic impulse. It is a trained one. I had been a diplomatic aide for 14 years before I came to Varath Station, and in that time I had participated in 4 emergency exercises, 1 actual minor hull breach event on a posting in the inner sectors, 2 protocol reviews. That required me to understand the documents well enough to revise them. I knew what the protocol said, and I knew how to run through it without losing my place. This is a skill that sounds modest until you are standing in a room where the floor is vibrating and the emergency lighting has gone on amber, and 2 of the station's 6 external defensive batteries have stopped reporting on your status display, at which point it is the only skill that matters. I activated the shelter directive. I sealed the document archive to read-only access. I opened a comm to the senior governor's suite and got no answer. Tried the executive wing duty officer and got a partial connection that broke up before I could confirm anything, except that there were people in there and they were mobile. I rerouted the operations center functions to my terminal. I assigned Sarah Amal to communications monitoring and a young bureau officer named Tessic to sensor tracking, and I noted that neither of them asked me any questions they didn't need answers to, which is the measure of whether the people you have working for you are going to be useful or not when conditions deteriorate. Then I sent the hail to the Conclave rescue relay at 7 hours 14 minutes, station time. I sent it on the protocol-designated emergency frequency, with the correct identification headers, the correct distress tier classification, and the correct positional data. I had run the hailing procedure in drill 7 times in the preceding year. I knew the protocol. The hail went out exactly as it was supposed to go out. I also know now that it did not go where it was supposed to go. The Conclave relay in the Vaith corridor received our positional headers and our tier classification, and, as its logs later showed, began the standard processing sequence for a mutual assistance activation. What it did not do was dispatch a response element. This is because our hail had arrived at the relay platform at the same moment as a separate emergency request from a mining installation. 2 sectors, Spinward, and the relay's priority sorting algorithm, designed to handle sequential emergencies, not concurrent ones, had assigned our request to a secondary queue pending an available response element. There were, at the time of our hail, no available response elements. There was 1 free positional element that was itself responding to the mining installation's request, and a second element that was 2 hours out from its last assignment and not yet recertified for emergency deployment. The queue processing time was estimated at 3 hours 40 minutes. We had, in my own assessment, perhaps 90 minutes before the raiders breached the inner ring and reached the administrative and residential levels. None of this was visible to me at the time. I knew only that the hail had gone out, that the acknowledgement from the relay platform showed standard processing status, and that I had done what the protocol said to do. I went to the secondary task, coordinating the station's internal response, accounting for personnel, securing the governorate's document archive, against the possibility that the situation deteriorated before the Conclave response arrived. What I did not know, and could not have known from my position in the administrative center, was that our hail had also done something else. The Vareth Station communication infrastructure was old. This is not unusual for outer-tier facilities. The station had been built in sections over approximately 3 centuries, and the communication backbone had been updated in segments rather than as a whole, which meant that buried inside the primary hailing architecture was a coupling junction from an earlier construction period, one that had been installed when the station's layout was different, when the outer ring had served a different function, and when certain frequencies were shared rather than segregated. The coupling junction had been noted in the station's infrastructure report 11 years prior as a low-priority item, present, functional, not causing interference in normal operations, to be addressed in the next scheduled infrastructure renewal. The infrastructure renewal had been deferred twice. Coupling junction was still there. When our emergency hail went out on the designated Conclave rescue frequency, a harmonic of that hail also propagated through the old coupling into the diplomatic communication array that served the compact household suites on level 12, and from there onto the human diplomatic band, specifically the duty monitoring channel that the compact required human nationals in active household liaison postings to keep open and attended during station hours. It was not technically the same hail. It was a harmonic distortion of the same hail. The distress header was degraded. Positional data was intact. The tier classification came through partially compressed, which in the Human Diplomatic Protocol's signal processing standard was read as an emergency classification rather than a routine one. Daniel Voss was on duty at 7 hours 14 minutes. He was drinking his pressed leaf infusions and reading the overnight packet. His monitoring channel received the degraded hail at 7 hours 14 minutes and 31 seconds. 7 hours 14 minutes and 50 seconds he sent a reply. I did not hear it in real time. I was busy. I learned about it 40 minutes later when my communications officer, a young Veth woman named Saret Amal, who had joined the Bureau 2 seasons prior and who was, by temperament, one of the most unflappable people on the station, came to the door of the room I was using as a temporary operations center and said, in a voice that was working very hard to be normal, "The human attaché has acknowledged the hail." I stopped what I was doing. The Conclave relay acknowledged the hail. I have the standard receipt. Not the relay, Saret said. The human attaché. He responded on the diplomatic band, he said. She checked her data pad, received. What's your status? And what do you need? I looked at her for a moment. She looked at me. Neither of us had a relevant protocol for this. He's in the compact suite, I said, which was not a response to what she had told me but was what I said. He was, she said. He left the suite approximately 6 minutes ago. We don't have him on the level 12 sensors anymore. The station shook. Another hit on the outer ring. The emergency lighting shifted, I said. Find him. The difficulty with finding Daniel Voss was that Vareth Station's internal sensor network, under normal circumstances, could track any individual unit bearing a compact identification chip, had been reduced by the damage to the relay junction on level 17. We had sensors on levels 1 through 14 and on levels 20 through 23. Levels 15 through 19, which included the inner docking ring, the secondary cargo bays, the utility corridor network that threaded between the structural frames of the outer ring's interior face, and the emergency equipment stations, were dark to us. This was, as I later learned, where Daniel Voss had gone. I am going to tell you what I know and what I was told, because I was not there. I was in the operations center on level 8. What I know is constructed from the censorship logs we do have, the accounts of the 9 surviving station crew members, who were in those levels when the raiders breached the inner docking junction, and one account from a Veth security officer, named Kareth Duvan, who had been the last person I had expected to still be on his feet, and the first person who tried to explain to me what he had seen. The raiders came through the inner docking junction on level 16 at approximately 7 hours 32 minutes. There were, by the count from the breaching footage logged by the one functional sensor in the junction corridor, 14 of them in the initial element. They were armed with suppression weapons, the standard raider load for a station seizure, disabling, short range, built for controlling crowds and breaking resistance, not for combat against prepared positions. This told me, when I reviewed the footage later, that they expected their opposition to be a station security contingent, which on Varath Station consisted of 11 personnel, 3 of whom were currently managing the Level 3 shelter protocol, and 2 of whom had been assigned to the executive wing when the first strikes hit. What they had in the junction corridors and the cargo bays adjacent to the inner ring was 6 security personnel at scattered positions, no coordinated line, and a communications blackout from the junction relay failure. They also had, somewhere in that sensor dark stretch of levels 15 through 19, one human trade attaché who had left his compact suite with what Serret later reconstructed from his suite's inventory system as the following items: his diplomatic satchel, his identification chip, his compact-issued emergency locator device, and a case that the suite's inventory listed as personal effects. Medical equipment, the notation said, standard compact provision for human nationals in remote postings. The case was not medical equipment. I know this because of what happened next, and because of what Kareth Duvan told me, and because of what I eventually found in a locked compartment in the compact suite when I sat down, much later, to revise the file. What Kareth told me, he had been at emergency position 6 in the secondary cargo bay on level 15, 2 other security officers, and 3 station maintenance crew who had been in the wrong place when the breach happened. The raider element had moved through the junction corridor and split. The larger part, pressing toward the administrative levels, a secondary element of 4 moving through the cargo bay toward the equipment lockers, and the comm relay that served the residential levels. It said they had heard the secondary element before they saw them. And then he said they heard something else. He said it like a man choosing his words carefully, the way you do when you are describing something that your vocabulary was not assembled for. There were 4 of them, he said, and then there were none of them. And I did not see it happen the way I expected a thing like that to happen. It was very fast, and it was very quiet. And, when it was over, the attaché was standing at the bay entry with the case open at his feet, and he looked up at us and said, Karath paused. He said, "Your governorate, which way is the junction control?" Karath told him which way the junction control was. He said, "Good," and he closed the case, and he picked it up, and he left, Karath told me. And I stood there for perhaps 30 seconds before I started moving again. I asked Karath what he thought during those 30 seconds. He said, "I thought that the file on the human attaché was perhaps incomplete. The junction control for levels 15 through 19 was a hardened operations room on level 17, the same level that had lost the relay junction to the second strike, which meant it was accessible only by the internal service corridor, which meant that reaching it required passing through approximately 80 meters of unsecured corridor that, by the time Daniel Voss was moving through levels 15 and 16, was occupied by elements of the raiding force moving in the opposite direction. I have the sensor logs from the functional sensors at either end of that corridor. I have an 8-minute gap in the middle. When the sensor at the south end of the corridor logs motion again, it shows one human individual walking at a measured pace. The corridor behind him does not show any other moving contacts. This is the kind of evidence that the incident report had to address. And I want to note for the record that writing that section of the incident report was the most difficult purely technical writing task I have undertaken in my career, because the technical writing format requires you to state what the sensors show and what the patrol logs show and what the survivor accounts show, and all 3 of those things show the same conclusion, and the conclusion is one that the standard incident report format was not designed to contain. I used the passive voice extensively. I noted that multiple hostile contacts were neutralized in the junction corridor during the sensor gap, and that the surviving witness accounts attributed this to the human attaché. I described the case as personal effects storage of undisclosed classification. I was accurate. I was not complete. He reached the junction control room at 7 hours 51 minutes. 2. There were 2 governorate technical staff inside, who had barricaded themselves in when the breach began. He apparently told them his name and asked them to restore the relay junction feed. One of them, a young woman named Avon Paul, later told me that she had been very frightened and had not entirely understood what was happening, and that he had said, while the other technician worked on the relay restoration, "You're doing fine. The outer ring is the problem. If we get communications back, Conclave relay will prioritize us." He was wrong about that last part as it happens. The Conclave relay had already prioritized us. It had moved us from secondary queue when our tier classification was upgraded by the processing algorithm, after the breach was confirmed, which happened because the Austrian platform's monitoring AI had flagged our positional data against the ported radar activity in the sector and re-evaluated the threat category. But at the moment he said it, he did not know that, and neither did Avon Paul. And she told me later that it had helped her keep her hands steady while she worked on the relay board. The relay junction came back online at 7 hours 58 minutes. Sensors across levels 15 through 19 restored. I was in the operations center, and I watched the sensor display come back up, and I watched the contacts populate. 6 security officers, teen station crew, the 3 compact household staff who had sheltered in place, and 1 human individual standing in the junction control room on level 17. I counted 12 additional contacts that were not moving. My communications officer, Surette, came in, saw the display, and did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Conclave element is now 4 hours out. Their relay shows them as dispatched following our priority upgrade." I looked at the sensor display. "That's 4 hours. Yes," she said. I opened the internal comms line to the junction control room. "Attaché Voss, this is the operations center." There was a pause, perhaps 3 seconds. "I hear you," he said. It was not a particularly notable sentence. It was what you said when you picked up a comm line and confirmed the connection. But something about the flatness of it, the complete absence of affect, the particular quality of a voice that has just done something and has not yet returned to the register it uses for administrative exchanges, lodged in my memory and has remained there since. "I hear you," as if it were an acknowledgement not just of the comm line but of the situation. "Yes, I am aware. I am still here." Continue. "The inner ring junction is still compromised," I said. "There are elements we have not yet accounted for on levels 18 and 19. Station security is regrouping on level 14. I understand," he said. "The Conclave element is 4 hours out." A pause. "What's your structural status on the outer ring?" I gave him the status. He asked 2 more questions, precise, technical, the kind of questions that told me he had either memorized the station's layout in the 8 months he had been here, or had looked it up in the last 40 minutes, and I did not know which was more unsettling. Then he said, "I'll work levels 18 and 19 toward the South Service Corridor. Security elements should come from level 14 toward the north. If we can close that corridor, each element that moved toward the administrative levels is isolated," I said. "You are a trade attaché." A longer pause. "I'm currently the closest available resource with the appropriate capability set. Is there an objection?" I thought about this for approximately 2 seconds. The station was still shaking at irregular intervals. My senior governor was sealed in the executive wing. I had 6 security officers, a partially functional communications network, and a Conclave rescue element 4 hours away. "No," I said, "no objection. Needs your security officer on level 14 to hold at the North Junction until I indicate the south approach is clear. Can you relay that?" I relayed it. What the logs show is a systematic clearing of levels 18 and 19, not the kind of clearing that a 6-person security contingent performs in a contested facility, which involves hard positions and coordinated advance, and in most scenarios, significant time and some attrition. What the logs show is one individual moving through those levels in a pattern that, when I later asked a Conclave tactical analyst to review the footage, he described as economical. He said it the way Karath Duvan had said his 30-second pause words, carefully, with the awareness that the vocabulary available to him was doing inadequate work. "It's not a word I'd use for a civilian asset," the analyst added, when I pressed him. He was a Conclave professional named Verith Sun, mid-rank, 10 years in patrol operations. and he had a way of making careful assessments that reminded me of myself in my better moments. Economical implies a specific kind of training, a specific kind of operational framing, the route choices alone. He stopped, scrolled the footage back, watched a section of sensor return from Level 18's West Access Corridor, where a contact that had been registering as mobile and armed had stopped registering at 7:53 and 32 seconds. How long has he been on Varath Station? 8 months, I said, and his cover was trade attaché. His posting was trade attaché, I said, because the distinction seemed important. And because I was, by that point in the proceedings, getting better at speaking the language. Sun watched the footage again. 8 months. So he had the layout. He would have had access to the station infrastructure records through the packed household database, I said, as part of the diplomatic liaison mandate. Sure, Sun said. He did not sound convinced that this was the explanation, and I did not blame him. He scrolled to another section. This junction here. Level 19, the cargo service branch. He doesn't take the direct approach. He goes around. Comes in from the secondary access. A pause. The direct approach would have been faster. But the secondary access is covered from 2 sightlines, I said. And then I stopped because I had not known that I knew this, and I was not entirely sure where the knowledge had come from, except that I had been looking at the station schematics for 11 days and some things lodge. Sun looked at me. Yes, he said, exactly. I was watching the sensor returns in real time from the operations center. I watched the hostile contacts on levels 18 and 19 stop registering, not all at once, but in sequence, with intervals between them that were consistent with deliberate movement through the level's layout. I watched the one human contact on my display move through those levels with a steadiness that was, given what the hostile contact sensor returns were doing around him, the single most precisely wrong thing I had ever seen on a station sensor display. It was wrong in the specific way that the thing is wrong when you have been using a category label for 8 months, and the category label is now clearly describing the wrong item. I kept watching. There was a moment, at approximately 8 hours 22 minutes, when the hostile contacts on level 18 had stopped returning, and the one human contact was moving toward the level 19 access when I became aware that I had stopped doing anything else. Seret was tracking communications. Tessic was updating the security officer positions on the display. I was standing at the sensor board watching a single dot move through dark space, and thinking, I selected him because his file showed no disruption. The dot kept moving. The station made sounds during this period. Structural sounds, the deep frame vibration of a building that has taken damage and is settling around, tit. The intermittent impact tick report from the outer ring where Vanette Sol's reduced battery was making its strongly held opinions known at intervals. These sounds were data. I was cataloging them, assigning them, noting them in the running log as each one resolved into a category. Structural, external, defensive battery, internal security contact. This is what training looks like from the inside. The noise of a crisis sorted into labeled containers so that you can keep functioning. I was functioning. I was also, simultaneously, doing something else. Was watching a dot on a sensor display move through levels where the people who were supposed to be the danger had stopped returning as contacts. Seret brought me water at some point during this period. I did not remember asking for it. She set it at my elbow and returned to her station and did not say anything. Was either professionalism or the particular restraint of someone who has decided that there are no words for the current moment, and water is. She has available. I drank it. I kept watching the display. I thought, I should be doing something else. I had a list. There were 14 items on the list, and I had been at item 7 when the relay junction had been restored and the sensor display had populated. And I had started watching the dot move. The dot moved. At 9 hours 12 minutes, he indicated the south approach was clear. At 9 hours 14 minutes, the security officers from level 14 moved through the north junction. At 9 hours 23 minutes, the last hostile contact on levels 15 through 19 was neutralized. The isolated element on the administrative levels, finding itself cut off from its withdrawal route, disengaged and retreated to the outer ring through a breach point, the station's defensive battery, had been tracking. Von Sol's battery expressed its strongly held opinion at that point, and the retreating element did not reach the outer ring intact. At 9 hours 47 minutes, the administrative levels were confirmed secured. At 10 hours 31 minutes, the Conclave rescue element arrived. Their senior officer was a Conclave patrol captain named Orvith Sant, and he was professional and thorough and plainly puzzled. He had his team move through the secured levels. He reviewed the situation reports. He confirmed that the breach was contained and that the station was functional if damaged. And then he came to the operations center and asked me, with the careful precision of a man who has looked at the sensor logs and knows that the numbers in them are not adding up the way they should, how many security personnel had been involved in the level clearance operation, I told him. He checked his data pad. This is one security officer and the trade attaché? Across levels 15 through 19 initially, I said. The security element from level 14 joined at 9 hours 14 minutes for the final approach. He looked at the display. He looked at the sensor logs. He looked at me. The trade attaché, he said. Yes, Voss, Daniel Voss, trade attaché, compact household liaison, Tier 2 diplomatic classification. He was reading from his own records. No military notation. That is what the file says, I said. Captain Sant was quiet for a moment. He scrolled through several pages of the sensor log. I watched him find the section from Level 18's West Access Corridor and stop on it. He was not a man who was easily surprised, and he was being, in this moment, somewhat surprised. I'd like to speak with him, he said. He is in the compact suite, I said. Level 12. He returned there when the clearance was complete. A pause. He asked me if I wanted a full incident report, and I said yes, and he said he would have it filed by end of day. He was I found the word procedural about it. Sant looked at me again. I had the impression he was reconsidering something. The Conclave relay in the Vaith corridor has our hail logged as received at 7 hours, 10 minutes and 37 seconds, he said. Standard processing queue. Priority upgrade at 8 hours 4 minutes following regional threat flag. We were dispatched from that queue. Yes, I said. I was aware of the timeline. The relay also shows, he consulted the datapad again, an anomalous signal entry on the diplomatic monitoring, band at 7 hours or 14 minutes. Partial distress header. Human diplomatic protocol acknowledgement at 7 hours 14 minutes and 50 seconds. The station's communication infrastructure has a coupling junction from an earlier construction period, I said. The emergency hail propagated a harmonic onto the diplomatic monitoring band. Attaché Voss was on duty monitoring at the time. Sant processed this. He intercepted a degraded harmonic of your rescue hail. Yes, on the diplomatic band. Yes. The relay received the original hail directly, he said. On the correct frequency, with the correct header intact, the relay began processing. The relay eventually dispatched us. He paused. Simultaneously, a harmonic version of the same hail reached the diplomatic monitoring band and was intercepted by a trade attaché who, Sant, at the sensor logs one more time. He had the look of a man constructing a sentence that he could see the shape of, and did not particularly want to finish. Addressed the situation. He addressed the situation, I confirmed. We stood there with that for a moment. Outside the viewport of the operations center, the Conclave patrol ships were visible in the mid-distance, holding station near the outer ring, while the engineering assessment continued. The starfield beyond them was the same as it always was, indifferent and enormous, and unaware of the procedural difficulty we were having in the operations center on level 8. I'll need to speak with him, Sant said again, with slightly more emphasis than the first time. I'll note that in the log, I said. I spoke with Daniel Voss before Captain Sant did. This was not procedurally required. I want to be precise about that. It was not required, and it was not, strictly speaking, in the scope of my role as the senior administrative officer managing the incident response. But I am the one who compiled his original file, and I am the one who annotated it and organized it, and selected him from the list of 11 eligible human nationals, based on a variable that, in retrospect, I had defined incorrectly. He was in the compact suite when I arrived. The tea was on. He was at the table with the datapad, and the incident report was already half-drafted. I could see the column headers from the door. He looked up when I came in, And his face had the same quality it always had, which is to say that it had no particular quality at all, in the sense of making its contents visible, and I had thought, in the 8 months prior to the 43rd day of the winter cycle rotation, that this was simply his characteristic affect. I was now revising that assessment. It was his characteristic affect. It was also possible that it was a practiced characteristic affect, is a different thing. I sat down. He waited. The case in your suite inventory, I said, listed as personal medical equipment. Yes, he said. It isn't medical equipment. A pause. It contains items with legitimate non-military civilian applications. I looked at him for a moment. Is that the precise answer, or is it the careful answer? Something moved in his expression. Not much. It's a carefully precise answer. I see. I folded my hands on the table. The Conclave patrol captain wants to speak with you. I expected that. He's going to want to know what you did, in levels 15 through 19. Sure. I'm going to tell him that I responded to a distress signal on my monitoring channel and addressed the threat situation present at the time, he said. That's accurate. It's a carefully precise answer. Yes. I looked at the half-drafted incident report on his datapad. The column headers were the standard compact format. The entries I could read from my seat were plain and factual, and organized with the same economy of language that, I was now thinking, characterized everything he did. Every filed report, every morning briefing note, every communication I had received from him in 8 months. The particular efficiency of someone who has been trained to put exactly what the record requires in the record and nothing more. The file I compiled on you before we were married, I said. He looked at me. I used disruption as the primary variable, I said. I selected you because your record showed no incidents of disruption, no conflicts with local customs, no operational irregularities, no notations of, I paused, any of this. No, he said, there wouldn't be. Because it's not in the file. Because it's not in the file. I absorbed this. Is it in a different file? He was quiet for a moment. Possibly. File I would not have access to. Very possibly. I thought about how to phrase the next thing. When you intercepted the hail. Yes. You heard a degraded harmonic of a VETH emergency signal on a diplomatic monitoring channel, I said. The header was partially intact. Positional data was intact. The tier classification was compressed into an emergency classification by my protocol's signal processing standard, he said. Yes, you had 43 days to wait for the Conclave relay to respond at standard priority queue processing time, and then I stopped. I acknowledged the hail and assessed the situation, he said simply. You responded to a distress call that wasn't aimed at you. He looked at me for a moment. Something in the way he held still. Positional data was intact, he said. The station ID was intact. The Tier 2 distress classification came through compressed into an emergency. Read. A pause. It was close enough. Close enough. I sat with that for a while. Tea kettle on the heating element at the counter made a small sound. He got up without being asked and poured 2 cups. Set one in front of me and returned to his seat and picked up his datapad and continued drafting the incident report as if we were at the end of the conversation, which I supposed, in his way of organizing things, we were. I drank the tea. It was not unpleasant. Captain Sant's inquiry took 2 days. This is not an unusual duration for a post-incident review of this complexity, and Captain Sant was thorough in a way I respected. He did not shortcut the sensor log review. He spoke to everyone. He was precise and patient, and he treated the accounts he received with the careful attention of a man who understood that he was constructing a record that would be used for purposes beyond his immediate visibility. At the end of the 2 days, he came to the operations center one last time and told me that his incident report would be filed with the Conclave Patrol Command, and a copy would go to the Compact's treaty office. I asked what the report would say, that the station was attacked by a raider element operating above its classified ceiling, he said. That the station's rescue hail was received and processed by the Conclave relay in the VETH corridor, and that a response element was dispatched following a priority upgrade. That the situation was substantially resolved prior to the Conclave element's arrival by a combination of station security personnel and compact household staff. Compact household staff, I said. It's accurate, he said. Attaché Voss is compact household staff. I looked at him. He had the expression of a man who has landed on careful precision as his chosen mode for a particular sentence. I recognized the mode. It is accurate, I agreed. He nodded. The Compact Treaty Office will have follow-up questions, he said. They have a standard review process for incidents involving diplomatic nationals. I expect Attaché Voss will know how to handle that process. I expect he will, I said. Sant picked up his case. He paused at the door. Administrator Orith. Captain, your hail went to the relay queue, he said. The relay queue did what it does. You'd have had a response element in approximately 2 hours more than you had. I looked at him. I'm not suggesting the outcome would have been different, he said carefully. I'm noting that the situation resolved as it did because of the coupling junction. A pause. Because of the signal propagation to the diplomatic band. Because of a monitoring channel that was attended. He paused again. Because of the specific individual who was attending it. I said nothing. I've filed 17 incident reports in my career, Sant said. I've never filed one where I had to use the passive voice in quite this many sentences. He paused at the door one more time. Luck with the revised infrastructure review. He left. I stood at the operations center display for a while after that, longer than I usually stand anywhere without a task in my hands. The sensor network was functioning across all levels. The station was damaged but stable. The outer ring was under engineer assessment. The executive wing had been opened following the all-clear. Senior Governor Trameth O'Reilly had reviewed the incident summary and had sent me a communication that I would describe as formally warm and genuinely shaken, which is how I always knew Trameth O'Reilly was feeling when she deployed her third register written style. She had said that the Bureau's handling of the emergency had been exemplary. She had noted the coupling junction infrastructure issue and asked that it be prioritized in the next renewal cycle. She had also said, at the end of the message, in a postscript that was slightly separated from the formal body of the text, in the way that postscripts are when the writer is adding something they know doesn't fit the document's register. Who is the human? Not a question. Trameth O'Reilly did not write questions when she was being precise. A subject with a period, I had sent back, Attaché Voss, Compact Household Liaison. He intercepted the hail on the diplomatic monitoring band. And then, after a pause, I have his file if you want it. And then, after another pause, had deleted that last sentence. Because sending someone a file that you yourself no longer trust is complete is a particular kind of dishonesty, and I was trying to be careful. The Conclave relay in the Vaith corridor had marked our hail as resolved. I looked at that notation for a moment. Resolved. Yes, technically. The relay didn't know the sequence. It knew only that the station had ceased active distress indicators and the response element had arrived and reported situation contained. It knew nothing about a coupling junction, or a diplomatic band, or a human trade attaché who had been drinking pressed leaf infusion and reading the overnight packet when a degraded harmonic signal came through his monitoring channel at 7 hours 14 minutes and 31 seconds, and who had put down his datapad and picked up the case listed as personal medical equipment and gone to levels 15 through 19 and addressed the situation. The relay had closed the ticket. From the relay's perspective, it had done its job. My perspective, standing in the operations center on level 8, with the sensor logs in front of me, and the incident report filed, and the tea, since cold on my desk, the relay had done its job, in approximately the third most important thing that happened that morning. I thought about this for a while. I thought about the queue processing time, 3 hours 40 minutes, and the 90 minutes I had estimated, before the breach reached the administrative levels, and the math between those two numbers, which had an answer I had been avoiding looking at directly. I looked at it now. It sat there in the way that facts sit when they are simply true, and do not care whether you find them comfortable. The relay had done its job. The relay had been, in the end, late. That, I thought, was the thing the incident report would not say, and the relay log would never know, and which I was going to have to carry in some annotation. That, the forms were not built to receive. Revised the file on the 47th day of the winter cycle rotation, 4 days after the attack. I revised it in the correct sense of revision. I kept what was accurate and removed what was no longer accurate and added what I now knew. His work history was accurate. His diplomatic classification was accurate. His recorded cultural adaptations were accurate. The notation about no incidents of disruption required a footnote, which I wrote, and then rewrote, and then set aside, and came back to twice before I arrived at language I considered both accurate and complete. The footnote reads, see incident log, winter cycle, rotation day 43. The disruption variable was correctly identified as the relevant measurement, TEED. The measurement instrument was calibrated against the wrong reference set. This is what treaty scribes call a limited disclosure notation. Accurate, precise, not fully explanatory, and understood by the people who need to understand it to mean more than its surface says. I added one further notation at the end of the file. I have written it 4 times and deleted it 3 times, because the available notation language is a poor fit for what it needs to say. The current version reads, Operational classification unknown. Active capability status confirmed. Treaty registry notation requires amendment. Recommend compact treaty office review. This is accurate. It is also the kind of carefully precise answer that I now recognize. I sent the amended file to the compact treaty office. They acknowledged receipt and noted that a review had been initiated. I do not know how long the review will take or what it will conclude. I know that the monitoring channel on the human diplomatic band was attended that morning, and that the signal reached a person who knew what to do with it, and that the station is still standing. That, I have decided, is what goes on the line with the blank notation, not in any form, not in any language I have. Just the signal reached the right person. It was not aimed at him. He heard it anyway. He was not what the file said he was. He was more. The morning after I revised the file, he was at the commissary table at the usual hour with the pressed leaf infusion and the overnight data packet. He looked up when I sat down across from him, which I did not usually do, and something moved briefly in his face. Not surprise, exactly. Something adjacent to it. I set my own data pad on the table. I've revised your file, I said. I know, he said. The treaty office notified me. There are questions pending. There always are, he said. I looked at him. He looked at me. Outside of the commissary viewport, the star field was the same as it always was. Indifferent and enormous, and full of signals going to places they were never aimed. Somewhere in the Vaith corridor, a relay platform was marking our ticket closed and moving to the next item in the queue. Somewhere in the outer ring, Net Souls, engineers were documenting what remained of a breach that had expected 11 station security officers. And gotten something else. Coupling junction on level 14, I said. The infrastructure review will flag it, he said. Yes, a pause. They'll repair it, he said. The next scheduled renewal. I thought about that. The hail that had gone where it was not aimed. The monitoring channel that had been attended. The case that was not medical equipment. Yes, I said. They will. He drank his tea. I opened my data packet. The station ran its morning cycle, and the lights came up through the viewport glass, and outside there was nothing but time and distance. And the quiet, persistent fact that the signal had reached him. That it had been enough. That he had been enough. I have no notation for it. I have left the line blank. That is, I have decided the most honest thing I can put there. A blank line with a date, which is how you mark the things that happened, that the forms were not built to receive.